Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and today is another special budget work session. Um, and the purpose of today, really, we don't have a set agenda. It's pretty much wide open. We have had the, a lot of budget discussions to get us to where we're at today. Our manager put together a budget, recommended budget, and presented to us. The proposed budget. We've got copies of that. We've heard yesterday from some of the larger institutions and agencies that we fund, some of their requests and reviewing their requests. And today is just an opportunity for us to evaluate all those requests and make any changes, or at least notify staff of any recommended changes that we would like to see in the budget, so that the budget can be finalized and put us in a better position to be ready to adopt. I think what the target date is, the 14th,
Yes, sir.
the 14th of June, which is approaching in a couple of weeks. So, with that being said, do you have any new information? Let me ask that first. So is there any new information that you want to share today before we get started going down the list of items that we need to check off?
No, sir. The only thing that really on the agenda that I need to discuss with the board today is a little bit about solid waste and how we're working on it. And the potential information we may bring back to the June 6th meeting, but nothing.
Okay. You want to go ahead and just do that now?
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So if you recall, when I gave the budget presentation to the board, that I did mention that at the time, there are no recommendations for increases in our availability fees for our solid waste system. Since then, we've been collecting information. I'm still collecting information in regards to potential increases for our landfill costs down through Waste Management down in Homer, Georgia. And I'm also, I should be receiving some information from Republic Services about our SRC cost. Now, what I'm trying to do is trying to estimate what those additional costs will be, and they will be effective January 1. So it's not until mid-year that they're effective. So my initial information that we were receiving, I was hoping that I'd be able to not come back and recommend increases in fees. But I just can't tell you that at this point. I mean, right now, what I'll be able to do is come back June 6th and tell you what we believe our estimated increased cost will be, and then talk to you about what it would take as far as fees to pay for that. The only other alternative, just to remind everybody, this is an enterprise fund that is self-funded through these fees. We're not allowed to let this fund go in the negative. So if we do not budget fees to pay for the cost, then your finance officer, Ms. Fox, will be appearing before this board, and if we are expending more monies than we're taking in, then Ms. Fox will be appearing before this board asking us to supplant it with general fund dollars, which is tax dollars, which is not a good thing.
No.
And so we will bring those numbers back. I wish I had it today, but I'm still finalizing those estimated costs, and it'll be back June 6th.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, do you have any idea, Mr. Adams, what the comparison is for our fees compared to, say, Macon or Haywood County?
Not now,
I'm
but I
just
can,
curious.
if that's something you want, we can bring it to you.
No, it's fine. I just wondered if
And that might be hard to do
it would. Never mind.
because
It's
Macon
not
County,
apples and oranges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Macon County has their own landfill,
Right.
Well, Haywood does too.
and Haywood does too.
So
So,
yeah, never mind.
we have a pretty long transport out of state.
It's not really the same. So
Homer, which is sort of north of Atlanta, but
They think they're Atlanta, but
it's a pretty good ways.
The contract for the Homer, Georgia landfill, it seems like we did that, is that a 12-year contract?
Well, it's everything, all of our contracts for solid waste are coming due at the end of the calendar year.
Oh,
Okay, so
I think it was a 12, seems like it was a 12 years. How long is the contract normally with Homer?
we can generally, I always look to 3 to 5 years. And I'm not sure, you may have gotten one 12 years a while back, but are you aware?
We renew it when it comes over. So it has been extended.
Any other questions about the solid waste?
Well,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
we got a contract with them
Yes,
to take
Yes.
the waste.
Yes,
we do.
We got a contract with Mr. Kinsler to carry the waste. Correct?
Correct.
And of course, then we have a huge amount of money to pay for people to work the system here, correct?
Correct.
That's about the three where the money goes.
And then recycling, is that a contract?
that's a contract. So we have a SRC contract with the Republic to run our SRCs. Then what you were mentioning, we have our costs at our main transfer station, which are our employees basically and operational costs. We do have recycling contracts that where we take our recycling to, and then we have transport contracts for those recycling. And then people always think of traditional recycling as aluminum, but we also have steel and other items. And then we also do things such as grind the wood waste and things of that nature at the current transfer station. So we have multiple types of contracts out there, and that is the reason when you sit and look at these costs, somebody may respond to you and say, well, why don't you reduce cost? Well, we don't control quite a bit of those costs. Those costs are dictated by the market and the contracts that are brought to us. And I just share that information with you all because if you recall, I stated that more so than any other operation, fuel is huge in this operation. If you start thinking about just the transport costs to Homer, transport costs to Asheville, transport costs between our SRCs, all of that really drastically impacts us. And so what makes this a little more difficult when we're trying to anticipate the cost coming in January is they can only give us their estimates now. And that's why when I come back and discuss with you all, should we recommend an increase or not, it's very difficult to project some of these costs in January,
Sure.
starting in January, because we just really don't, when we talk about fuel costs, we just really don't know. And that's where if we chose not to increase rates, the only reason or the main reason you would choose not to do that is you would gamble that some of these costs would come down by the time we're ready to renew these contracts. And it would be it is a gamble in that sense. And that's going to be somewhat the basis of the conversation and recommendations to the board come June 6th.
Okay.
Do contracts ever have a clause that says, this is what we need projecting this much fuel cost, but if the fuel cost goes down, could the contract go down?
Well, our main transportation contract, and they're all different. They're different. Okay?
Okay.
But our main one that takes us to Homer has a fuel escalation clause. So currently, right now, we are paying a lot more through that escalation clause, and it would go down if fuel goes down.
Okay.
Okay. But what we don't know is we're also renewing contracts in January.
Sure.
And then, so for example, then if you look at our Republic contract for our SRCs, they don't have a fuel escalation clause. They have a CPI clause, but their contract is ending now also. And what they were telling me was their CPI did not cover their cost. They were abiding by the contract, but their CPI was not covering their cost. It's the consumer price index increases. And so they're going to have to, when they come back and revisit that with us, they're going to have to turn around and see how they would recoup their cost. And then that's going to dictate whether or not we try to bid or retain services, all of that. It's all county operations is complex, but this, trying to project all this in January is what's making it really difficult to come with a set recommendation at this point. It's becoming pretty solid that we're gonna pay more money next year. And if that's the case, then I have no other choice but to recommend increases.
If we do, as we look forward to a new contract, there's a company called the Trash Company, and they have really done very well in the last 4, 5, maybe 10 years in Western North Carolina. It might be worthwhile to reach out and see if they are able to handle what Republic does. I know they've been very competitive with Republic, and that's why they've taken over so much of the market in Western North Carolina. Might be something to look into.
Any other questions about the solid waste? Okay. Going back to yesterday's conversations, the very first presentation that we heard was from Southwestern Community College. And I think it's a fair statement to make that Dr. Thomas was pleased with what was being proposed in the upcoming budget and that it met all the needs of the community college. Would that be a fair statement, Mr. Adams?
Yes, sir.
So there's no additional requests needed for Southwestern Community College?
That is correct.
Anybody have any concerns or questions about any of that? Like I said, we've met their needs, so.
We have a trustee meeting tonight at SCC. I kind of wish this meeting had been after that. I'd have had a better feel of the pulse, but I agree with the assessment you just said.
I do have one question that came up last night.
Okay.
Ronnie Beal made a comment. I did not write down I was looking at my notes to see if I wrote down, we had the Southwest Commission, read 7 Western counties. And he was talking about budgets, and he mentioned that SCC had come to them and asked for $500,000 more dollars because the enrollment was down, but that they were projecting that the enrollment went back up. And I don't remember Dr. Thomas saying anything about that. Was their funding from the state cut? Do you know? That's what Ronnie Beal alluded to, that their funding from the state was cut because their enrollment went down.
The FTE, which is the number of students,
Yes.
hours of classwork they
Yes.
take, is down because of COVID.
Right.
Generally, and I think that is probably a fair assessment on that. If the FTEs go down, so does the funding from the state.
Okay.
That might be the makeup difference.
And here again, just like a few moments ago, this is not an apples to apples comparison because different counties fund the college in different ways. And for example, Macon
We funded
County,
a lot more.
they do their maintenance for the facilities as opposed, it's a whole different way they do.
Okay. Thanks, I didn't know. Well, I just mentioned at that time, because they had a little discussion, I said, well, with the opening of the new health science building, I said, they're projecting that enrollment's going to increase. And Ronnie Beal admitted that. He said, oh, yes, they're projecting it increases because those are really careers that people are going into right now with good salary outcomes. And so I think it's real positive. But I just was curious because they were asking, SCC was asking Macon County for more of a, which I was pleased to see because we serve
Yeah.
all 3.
He wasn't asking us for more, was he?
No, he never asked us.
No,
for
he
one.
didn't. I
No.
know, and that's, okay, that answers my question.
So I can give you a perspective from a smaller county perspective to a regional system. Where I moved from, we always wanted more curriculum, more offerings at our smaller campus. Okay. And so that's where FTE has become extremely important to be able to offer
Sure.
the variety.
Yeah.
And so I would ask, next time we talk to Dr. Thomas, I'd ask if that was associated with attempting to keep the variety of offerings.
Sure.
And I don't know if you've ever had that conversation on the main campus versus smaller campuses, but I can tell you come from a smaller county, that was always a conversation with the community college of always trying to drive and have more offerings in the county. But what really impacted was FTEs on that campus.
Right.
You know, you gotta have basically so many
That makes sense, yeah.
so many FTEs to offer a class. And
Sure.
if you don't, then they don't get the state funding to offer the class. And I would guess that there's some combination of conversations there regarding that.
Sure, and then he looked at me and said, well, I bet you got asked for a lot more. And I just smiled at him because I really didn't know if it was because of that, so I didn't say anything.
Macon has spent a lot of money on their law enforcement facility.
Oh,
And
okay.
a new burn building. They've repaved their driving course. And it was pretty big expenses. So that might be
It could be.
associated with that part of the
Sure.
curriculum, the law enforcement component, firefighters.
Well, then the next presentation that we heard was from the Jackson County Public Schools. And Don, do you want to sort of summarize a little bit, sort of help explain what was said yesterday, especially since Commissioner Dietz couldn't be here, about where we're at in this sort of a holding period with the reserve that we're going to set aside, and sort of a timeline that we can anticipate having future conversations.
Yes, sir. So what I do have up on the screen is what Dr. Ayers presented to the board. I'm not going to spend the amount of time she did on these slides, but just for your information, boys, she gave, and we'll give you a copy of this, boys, if it wasn't already
I
in
think
your
he's got
box.
one here.
Okay. So she did just go over through the year's worth of funding. She did talk about the twofold request and basically going through what she's looking to cover. And basically, really, they're trying to cover 5%, what they're projecting 5% operational cost. And then are also trying to cover the cost that is necessary to meet the mandate of minimum salary of $15 an hour. And those are the two, again, I'm not going to do as well as she did presenting, but those are the two primary additional costs that they are seeing that impacted their request. Is there anything?
My understanding was that all the jobs weren't $15 an hour. It was either $15 or a certain percent above
9%.
the current.
$15 or
Right,
2.5%.
okay. So I just wanted to make that
Okay.
clear because some of them didn't quite go to 15. Is that correct?
No, it's a minimum of, my understanding, it's a minimum of 15 or 2.5%, whichever's greater.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Whichever's
Okay,
greater.
I misunderstood. Thank you.
And so, and ultimately, I'll just, if you don't mind, I'll focus.
The most important slide.
Yeah, I'll focus on this slide. So if you take a look at their overall requested increase, is $10,089,377. You can see that right now, what's in the proposed budget, if you recall, I proposed to go ahead and allocate a 2% increase to the Board of Education, which is at $8.6 million. They proposed to utilize $306,000 of their fund balance. I have recommended that we hold to the side $455,000. This is included in the Jackson County budget, which is 5.4% to set aside for future conversations with the Board of Education. And that what that shows for them for today's numbers is they're projecting a $727,128 shortfall. But what's been recommended is that after the state budget is passed, there are several items going on at this point, and they don't know what their state budget's going to be. And so after the state budget is passed, is for the Board of Education to come back before this board to discuss what their needs are. It is anticipated that they would need up to that $455,000. Right now, they're showing a $727,000 shortfall. And so I think at that point, I believe it'll be a fund balance conversation, discussions with the Board of Education about what their fund balance is and could they allocate more of their fund balance. If the Board of Commissioners chooses to assist them, it would be a fund balance conversation for us. And then ultimately, if the Board of Commissioners choose to allocate any additional funds above the 455, let's just say they come back and say there truly is a $727,000 shortfall. If you choose to allocate any portion of that, then we'll have to make that up in our capacity, our ongoing expenses in next year's budget, in the next year's budget. So I don't know if I explained that well.
Yeah,
but-
no, that's a good summary, and that's sort of where we're at now. But I think the positive is there is fund balance available with the school system. And one of the things that we just need to have a conversation with them about is what is an appropriate level for them to maintain. There is a need to maintain a fund balance for cash flow purposes and to meet unexpected needs. But what that number needs to be is the real question. And I know it was alluded to yesterday that 5% of their operating budget ought to be a sort of a number that's set aside. And so that's a conversation I guess we'll just need to have. And then also I think, if I'm correct, Mr. Adams, they were projecting as part of their budget to put additional funds into fund balance.
Yes.
So that's another conversation, redirecting those funds instead of going to fund balance, redirecting them towards meeting this mandate. That could go a long way towards meeting the need. So we won't know that until we get to that point in August or whenever the state decides to adopt a budget.
We have in the past, I remember back several years ago, maybe not so many samples, that they were asking for this and this and a lot, and then we get to looking, we really didn't realize, it seemed like at the point, how much money they had. And I like to sit on my money and spend Sanders if you can, but that's kind of the situation that somebody was. You can't blame them for them to watch out for themselves and say, but, at some point, that can't be.
Yeah.
We can't cover them. And then-
Well, exactly.
That's the whole thing about it.
Absolutely, you're totally right, and I think I don't think any of us would want them to spend their fund balance down to zero.
No.
We really, just like Jackson, even though they don't have the statutory requirements to have maintain a certain level like we do, it's just good common sense practice. Even in your own family budget, you ought to have some money set aside in a savings account for a rainy day in case something happens. And so I think that's a conversation we just have with them. What is an appropriate amount?
That's good for us.
It's good for us.
To know that they've got that if something,
Oh,
that we may not
yes.
have, big to
Yes.
have something.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I just went back to the slide where they showed the history of funding. So did you see the even amounts here? This was the amounts of funds that the school board requested.
Yeah.
Because there was federal dollars that came in. This is a very similar conversation that we're having right now, that they did not ask for additional funds at that point because they were spending down what's equivalent to a fund balance conversation through federal dollars. And so this really becomes a similar conversation for the next couple of years in regards to if their fund balance, if we feel like they have a little more fund balance than needed, whatever that's determined, then it can be a planned spend down with the idea that you come back and fund, you continue funding after they get to that fund balance level. Because that's exactly, when you talk about this level funding, I came in right here at the 16 and 17, and that's where, if you take a look, they sat down and had conversations with me that they had just completed and gotten their fund balance or savings down so low that that's when we actually had to start increasing their allocations after that. So I just want y'all to know that this can be a planned conversation in regards to all of our savings and what's appropriate spend down and what's appropriate savings and so forth.
And one other caveat to this, I think it's worth mentioning, and especially Commissioner Deets to hear. What was the terminology they used for their American Recovery Funds?
Sorry.
ESRI. They call them ESRI. I'm not sure what that stands for, but but those funds are way more restrictive than our funds. We have a lot of flexibility in what we can use ours for as far as supplanting general fund expenses. They are very restricted in what they can spend. So it is a little bit more challenging for them. So some of that money is that money, and they're trying to figure out ways to spend it and get the best use for it. So that's another part of this whole conversation. But I feel very strongly personally about our school board, and I think they've done a great job, and the administration has done a great job managing and providing the quality education they do. And we've always had a great relationship, and so I don't see this being a problem at all. Going forward, we'll sit down and work this out in August or whenever the state can put together a budget. But I think at the final conclusion of yesterday, they are satisfied with what's being projected at this point and are willing to come back and have additional conversations.
Could you go back one moment to that slide, Don, where it shows the years? And I was teaching school during those years where it didn't change. We got no salary raise for several years. Nobody did in the state. And that was one of the issues now is the state's requiring some salary raise. So that makes a difference, in the money they need. But that goes back to that conversation I had with Darlene about the salary study, because what they did then was when they started to change and give a salary increase, they gave it to new teachers, which was good for recruitment, but it was hard on teachers like career teachers like myself who actually was bringing home less money because health benefits increased. More was being taken out of our checks. And I was so pleased that our salary study did not do that. We were able to show a good respect for all of our employees across the board. So anyway, that's just a little history on that.
And I'm trying to remember, was it stimulus money?
They had stimulus, federal stimulus.
Federal stimulus money, and that came back,
2010.
yeah,
2010.
yeah.
And continued for several years.
Yeah. It was a big pot of money that drew down from.
And they did base their budget on 1920 numbers too. The state instructed them to do that.
Correct.
That can change.
1920? Oh my goodness.
Okay, so really we don't have anything else unless someone had some kind of particular question about the school funding. That's sort of in a little bit of a limbo until later on. The next presentation we saw yesterday was the public library system, and Tracy Fitzmaurice, and they were very pleased with their level of funding and no additional requests there unless there was any concerns from the board members. Then, help me, who was next after that? The sheriff's
Here.
office.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right.
And Mr. Adams, I know the sheriff requested, and we went over his budget, fairly detailed budget, a lot of requests, a lot of line items for capital needs. And then there were some personnel increases requested. Do you want to sort of highlight the sheriff, what you included in your budget as opposed to what he recommended yesterday? And
So, I'll go backwards. I'll talk about what's in there. If you look at the recommendation from a personnel standpoint, there's only 2 recommendations in this budget for new personnel changes. That's one, extending the social services position and moving GIS under IT. So beyond that, it's recommended that everybody just continue on their career path So ultimately, it's recommended that all the sheriff office employees receive their step increase, okay? Obviously, they'd all gotten their implementation of the salary study. I believe you heard the sheriff and the chief talk about that that's helped stabilize the force, and they were very appreciative of those funds. The sheriff did come through with some additional requests, some new personnel. I'm going to try to do this without going back to the book. Some new personnel, I believe, a couple people in relation to drug investigations. I do believe did he come back in with his his same jail position, the new jail position, and I believe he was looking for some reclassifications of administrative assistant, and then also a court position. Is that correct? Am I missing anything? I think that's it. And so he'd come in that. Now, as far as pay changes, he'd asked.
And none of those positions are included in the budget.
No, sir. At this point, no, sir. And then the other thing that he had presented to the board is just some changes to how his people are paid. And if you notice, he did say in the future he would like for the board to consider holiday pay. And then we kind of right back around and he said sooner the better, but he did use the words in the future. He'd like for this board to consider holiday pay for the employees. And that's basically an actual additional pay for those who work on holidays is what that is. And then I do believe there's some, was there anything else in there for the holiday? Yeah, was there overtime or is there, I can't remember. Let me go back and.
But I think the sort of the summary of this is on the holiday pay and some of those other compensatory items,
Okay.
they don't impact just the sheriff's office. We have other departments within our county system that would also potentially
Yeah.
need to be evaluated. So it's one of these conversations, if we give it to one in fairness to others, we would have to try to, so it's something we're not in a position to do at this
So-
point.
The other two were hazard duty pay and paid educational training incentives. And so at this point, you're correct. None of that is actually in this recommended budget. And again, just to piggyback on what you just said, this would need to be, if the board wished to move forward with some type of holiday pay, this would need to be a countywide kind of study to look at this, to see if this is needed, and then how it would be implemented countywide. And at this point, this also ends up being kind of a recruitment retention conversation. And the reality is this board, in my opinion, this board has just implemented a significant pay study.
Man,
And,
how much more you need?
and so from that end of it, the sheriff was very pleased with what this salary study has done for him and his operations. And so I believe that gives us time to further discuss these in future budgets.
Hazard duty pay for what now?
You'll have to go through and look at this office request during the declare state of emergency.
Hazard duty all
I
the
was
time,
gonna say, all of it
isn't it?
is.
Well, and
He focused more on the holiday pay in these conversations.
And some of that came about during the COVID discussions. And when COVID dollars came from the federal government, there was money set aside to pay what's considered hazard duty because officers, paramedics, first responders were having to interact in a hazardous situation. And so that's sort of a continuation of asking, can we continue those dollars?
So continuing on, that's, as far as personnel, that's where we're at on personnel. As far as all of the other line items, adjustments been made for inflation in regards to fuel costs, things of that nature. All the capital, the vast majority, if not all the capital that's been requested, been discussed, is being recommended in this budget. So for the remainder of the budget, those items that are mentioned about the jail repairs and things of that nature, all of that is included in this recommended budget. So the reality was, I believe the sheriff was pleased with the presented budget and just asked this board to look in the future for these other types of different type of pay for the employees.
Commissioner Dietz also, he was asking for money for a body scanner for when they come in get out of the car after being arrested and go in to strip them out to get the the jail suit on, body scanner to look for any weapons of any type or even drugs that they could have put
That's right.
somewhere in any part of body cavity, which is, I think it was like 150 grand, I think it was, something like that, but it's pretty good thing to have. Did you get my text yesterday?
I did.
Yeah, see,
Oh my
that's,
goodness.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I
even
never
in the
would have
most secure
imagined.
environment.
Yeah.
So,
And I believe the body scanner and the 8 vehicles that he requested, which we normally would fund in the fall, he requested it to be sooner, like July 1st. So that would be $500,000 or so total, maybe a little over $500,000 for the vehicles and the body scanner, instead of waiting until the fall, be on July 1st, or move forward on acquiring that. And then in lieu of holiday pay, they currently, if I'm not mistaken, they get time off. I guess they work a 12-hour shift on Christmas Day. They get instead of pay, they get another 12 hours time some down the road somewhere.
Did you or I'm not sure if Mr. Adams said this, but so the 2 additional narcotics
Not
that are
funded.
not funded, do you think that's needed? I mean, I don't know.
well, at this
I'm
point,
curious.
I mean,
Knowing it's a problem in
I
our,
understand,
yeah.
but at this point, what's being recommended is not to fund those.
I think from my standpoint, do we always need additional investigations, and do we need to do everything we can in regards to drug prevention in our community? Absolutely. But I'm also, from my end, is recognizing that we are going to have a new elected sheriff that's going to be installed in December.
Okay,
And so from that end of it,
that's a good point.
what I even had some conversations about some of these elements that, like the body scanner and so forth. I wanted to make sure that there were no potential issues there that a new sheriff may come in and agree or disagree. And I think we all feel comfortable with these equipment that's being recommended. But to some extent, I believe, from my end, I'd like for the new sheriff to be seated, come in, evaluate the needs, and then that would put us into next year's budget about
I do
what
too.
is
Thank
needed.
you. I appreciate that clarification. Thanks.
And then the next presentation that we heard was from here. And I think there is a shortfall based upon what they're projecting that they feel like they need for operational needs versus what's been budgeted. Do you want to summarize anything?
Well, as you can see, Dr. Chamberlain came and presented to the board. A couple of things to note: they do have a new executive director that'll be coming on board. The reality is they did, out of the $313,000 request, they did reduce it down to 205 is what they're claiming that they need. What's in the budget is, you have it?
165,
165. They're stating that there were $40,000 short for what their needs are. They also did state that they could go after potential additional grants. Ultimately, my recommendations based on a couple of things. One was just trying to give them some increases. It was the only nonprofit increase that was recommended, and it's recognizing the increased cost of hotels. They are going through a planning process right now in regards to trying to pull together community input about long-term, what is our homeless program going to look like. And so at this point, I think they told you, ultimately, they received a lot of funds from COVID, and that's what expanded their operations. And so I just, at this point, did not feel like I was in a position to recommend supplanting those funds until a clearer picture can be understood about what a long-term or homeless program is going to look like. Now, that doesn't negate the fact that they may be $40,000 short, doesn't negate the fact this may end up causing them to remove people But, you know, they did get quite a bit of money through COVID. It's what allowed them to do the summer programs. It wasn't just the
Right.
housing costs that they used this money for. They used this money to help with case management. So it is going to cause some heartburn for these monies to not be available to them anymore. But at $160-something thousand, this still funds what the initial primary purpose of the request for proposals. And by the way, I'll talk about that a little bit too. And that's basically to help with case management and the hotel rooms. That's what it was for.
That's
winter
important. That's a
months.
very important note, that
winter
it
months.
funds what we initially set this program up for.
And so for anything to expand, we need to go through a process that they're going through at this point. And so it does fund right now case management and some hotel rooms for what they call Code Purple. But it doesn't necessarily fund all the different programs that they're working on at this point. And I will tell you, when we did go through I actually brought the request for proposal here in case we got in that conversation when here was here. But ultimately, just a reminder, I do want to remind everybody that we did not have multiple agencies stepping up for this. We did not have social service. There were not multiple. Here was the only agency that stepped up. Okay. So just, from that standpoint, doesn't mean we need to fund them everything they ask for. But I do want to recognize, listen, I sat down with all the nonprofits in this community that were somehow related, or many of them, not all of them, that related to serving the homeless. And although that was a portion of their mission, it wasn't their primary mission, and none of them felt like they could take on this type of responsibility. And so I do just want to remind everybody, here did step up, and our agencies, DSS, the DSS board took this issue up and said they did not want to take on the homeless situation. So I do want to recognize here's willingness to step up, the work that board has done, what they're attempting to do. I know there's varying opinions as far as the homeless program in our community, but I just want to recognize this group has stepped up and they're at least attempting to work on this issue when no one else would do it. So just want to point that out.
I don't know if y'all got the phone call from the group that we paid for to do a study. Did y'all get a phone call?
I don't know what you're talking about. You
Oh,
have to explain it a little bit
Okay.
more.
Well, we paid for a study on homelessness, and Mr. Cochran contracted with a group to do this study. Do you remember that? That was some of our ARP money went for that.
They're still doing it.
They're doing
still
it,
conducting
and
studies.
one of the people involved called me and said he was calling the other commissioners. Did you answer your phone?
Not if exactly.
Anyway,
No,
he
I-
asked
I
me a
didn't get
few
a phone call.
questions. It was a little survey, and I answered. But they're having a meeting on June 2nd, Thursday, June 2nd, from 6:30 to 8 to present their findings. And I think any of us that can attend, if you could, that would be really good, because that's going to give us a picture of what their recommendations might be. Now, like any study, their recommendations may or may not be what we want to do, but we're going to have some discussions about it. And I think it would be helpful to hear. I'm sure they'll make a presentation to us. But that's Thursday, June 2nd from 6:30 to 8. And one of the things that Greta Worley, who is going to be the new director, mentioned is that they're really focusing on anyone with children. And I think that, to me, says a lot about their priorities. I think that is a priority we have mentioned, that when there's children, we want them safe, warm, and dry. And they're addressing that right now.
And they've just so you know, here has acquired the services of this group, but then they're also working with Pathways with the director there. So my conversation with Mr. Cochran, and I eventually need to switch to the new executive director when she comes on board, is that will give two real good perspectives on,
Good.
you'll have that study, the people leading that group, they have a lot of experience in the homeless, serving the homeless population.
Yes.
But they're not necessarily directly from here. So bringing in pathways into these conversations also allows for, I just want to point that out because I think we need to look at the results of the study, but then also with here working with another organization just in a neighboring county who's got real direct experience in these issues. I think between those two, hopefully there can be a process and a process to get us to an acceptable plan. If that makes
Well,
sense.
and I think Pathways has evolved. It was an emergency shelter in Waynesville at first. It's not anymore. They're doing what case management and moving people out of homeless, but they don't do the emergency piece. And there's reasons for that, which will be helpful for us to hear, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So at this point, I feel comfortable with what the managers presented and recommended is to maintain the funding in the current budget, even though there was the additional request yesterday. And then just ask that here, as Dr. Chamberlain mentioned, apply for some additional grants and see if they can acquire that funding through additional grant opportunities. And hopefully we'll revisit it if need to in the future. Anybody else have anything about that request? And that was the end of our request yesterday, and it was a little bit different this year. In the normal budget cycle, we have a revolving door of presentations that last the better part of a half a day, where a lot of organizations just come one right after the other and thank us for their contributions and ask for a few extra items. And so all of those nonprofits, Mr. Manager, as you said, you left them at level funding,
Right.
with the exception of
Here.
here. And
Correct.
so everybody else that we normally fund in this big thick notebook that they put together for us got level funding. There are some people who did not this year submit requests. That we don't know why they may or may not have chose to submit requests, but that's how it ended up. I think Commissioner Woody, I know you mentioned to me that you had some questions about some of those funding requests. This is probably an appropriate time for us to take up any kind of questions about nonprofit funding as another piece of this bigger picture.
Well, I was very pleased with the reports and just reading the number of people served. And number 9, the disabled American veterans. I know that's a multi-county effort, but it didn't say how many were served. And I'm not questioning the amount of money at all. I just wondered if you knew of a number.
I do not.
Okay.
We did that for you.
Well, and I think it's very important that we serve those disabled veterans. And then I did have a question. Habitat for Humanity, Macon and Jackson, they are planning, it said in their report, they're planning to build a home in Jackson County. The only concern I had was their board of directors. That's the two things I look at. I look at who's on the board of directors. It doesn't appear to be anyone from Jackson County, even though they have their store here and serve our community. They're also starting to do home repairs, which I know Mountain Projects is real pleased with because they have volunteers who are experienced carpenters and other home improvement things. But do you know if they have, maybe y'all know these people on that list, but are any of them from Jackson County? I did not see that.
And we can submit a request to them to ask to
Yeah.
put somebody or
Well, and that's a thing I think in, as far as being consistent, because our tax dollars, that's what this is. This is our citizens' tax dollars. And we want to support these nonprofits, but we've requested in the past that, people who get this money have representation from Jackson County. I don't know that that's a rule, but we've asked that before, I remember.
Just one thing to mention, I think at one point there was a Jackson County Habitat and that went away.
It did.
And I think this is Macon County Habitat that
Okay.
took on
Okay.
services here, and that may be why.
In our
I see.
county.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, we might just ask them if they would mind including someone on their board, just because I feel like that's respectful of them getting our money.
Let me talk this out, because you
Okay.
just taught me something I didn't know. So this is Macon County Habitat. Okay, so,
Well, it says Macon/Jackson on their letterhead.
But it's because they do service in Jackson.
Oh,
service.
okay.
So if we had a
see.
Jackson County Habitat,
Okay, that may be different then, yes.
then I sort of take back what I just said. I don't know if it would be, because if we had a Jackson County Habitat, then that's when we would want Jackson County people to be on the board. But if we don't have a Jackson County Habitat willing to serve Jackson County, then
I see what you're saying. Mhm. I just assumed. I
Reach out
guess.
to them and ask them
There
if,
wouldn't be nothing wrong with someone from this county being in that, but
no,
there.
I don't think
So I
so.
don't see what they'd mind, and there's a lot of money and donations
Well,
that
they
come
do
out
a
of Jackson
great-
County down there every day.
Yes, and they do
And
a
it's real good, and
wonderful
I'm glad
job.
of it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, just reach out to them and express the desire that we'd like to see somebody potentially on that board or
Looking for the names.
working with them. But I think you're not questioning their funding. I think that's the thing today that we're more focused on is, are we questioning their funding?
No.
That's something we can follow up with them
Okay.
about. Any other questions about funding that,
No.
okay. Any other board members have any questions about the funding for these nonprofits?
Just a word of caution to Commissioner Woody that when she calls them up to see about getting a Jackson County board member, you might find yourself on another board.
How good a carpenter are you?
Not at all.
Y'all
Oh,
gonna
my
call just
goodness.
maybe in the last day or so about someone that had not applied that called.
I got a call from Ken Brown. with
Yes.
I did send him an application package yesterday.
Thank
He
you.
had gotten one earlier, but he had misplaced it.
He lost. He
Well,
texted me
I
too.
didn't remember who it was now that you remind me. I did see him at the farmer's market.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, why in the world? You know how Ken is. And I asked him to call somebody, so,
He called.
okay.
I suggested he call you and ask if, thank you so much, Darlene.
it would really, as far as we're gonna talk timeline today, if y'all say he really need it before June 6th. Because once we finalize the budget, then
This is his second.
it ends up being a
chance.
budget amendment next year. It's just-
Correct. Yeah. If it don't happen before June 6th, it'll be a budget amendment. We'll take it out of contingency or somewhere else. All right, so I think that settles all of the nonprofits. What other topics have we talked about that we need to? I'm trying to think. I know obviously still fire department something we're going to talk about here in just a second, but I'm trying. Is there anything else that's outstanding? Anybody have anything?
I just wanted to ask about, and this might just be something we do later, but we had talked about setting up a fund with what we have left from ARP and calling it Jackson County America Rescue Plan. So that when we disperse those funds for a project, we can let the community know this is money that we got from the America Rescue Plan.
That money's set aside in
See
the
it right
special revenue fund.
That's it.
label that now.
Yes, except that, okay, but I thought, maybe I misunderstood. I thought all that went to our salary study
No.
No.
so that we could not have to,
So what we,
accounting wise, so that we didn't have to,
but I still asked to set it aside. We're not, okay, so yes, for the most part, well, tell them what you're doing. As far as you're submitting in basically expenses. It could be, it's not the salary study, it can be just general salaries. It's
salaries, okay,
General
general
salaries,
salaries,
okay.
you're right.
And
okay.
we're submitting that in, we're using what's called the revenue option.
Yes,
okay?
that's what I
We're using
thought.
a revenue option to utilize these funds to replace revenues. In order to do that, you have to show what you're doing with those revenues, in which we can use it for general governmental expenses, okay?
Yes.
General governmental expenses, she's just using salaries and things of that nature.
Yes.
But following through with what we always talked about, we still want to track these funds, right? That's what we said that we want to, just because we put them in we want to track them so that you can
Yes.
decide where to spend them. Is that
Right.
correct? So that
Yes.
is why she has set up this fund right here.
Okay,
There it is. So we're tracking that separate from our general fund. It's general fund dollars.
right.
We're still calling it American Rescue, but technically that's not what
Well, that's what I didn't understand
Yeah.
because I thought when I saw that line item, it was just going into the general fund and we would never know where it was going.
well, so you
Not,
see,
not being misspent by any means.
but no, you
but-
see how there's the general fund right there. You see how
Yes.
that's separated right
Okay.
there? And so what's going to happen is so the monies that if we start moving forward with the domestic peace facility,
Yes,
it's going to be, we're going to eventually do a project ordinance, and then that money will come out of this
Okay.
fund right here.
okay,
And then there will literally
see.
be a tracking
Yes.
mechanism.
okay, that
We set
answers that
aside, we
question.
set
Thank
aside,
you.
out of that, we've earmarked $1 million towards broadband.
Yes,
There's other projects we've earmarked out of that, but we know we have several $1 million left in that we've never allocated or earmarked.
okay,
And so from that, I know what you're asking is we would potentially be able to fund other little smaller projects that could be tied to this.
okay.
So let's go
Or
to this.
even the one, say the domestic violence shelter, I think it would be a wonderful thing to have a small plaque that said funding from the America Rescue 2022 or something, just because I feel we're showing accountability to our citizens that this money was spent on their behalf, which all the money is, but very
So-
specifically.
And not to take away from what Dogwood Trust did as well.
Oh,
know,
no.
with the
I
du-
think
if
we
you-
should
if you
put
have-
that on the plaque too. Yeah, whatever.
So if you look at this, what was presented to the board, out of that 8.5 I just showed you that's separated, 4.5 is not committed at this point.
Okay, that's
Okay.
the money I was
That's the
thinking.
money you're talking
Okay.
about that can
Thank
go above and beyond, that's taken into consideration, everything that's been committed at this point. The broadband, the Center for Domestic
Sheriff's,
Peace,
wasn't
sheriff
that,
stuff, all that's taken out of that 8.5, so now there's still
Cameras.
4.5. And this is where I mentioned to you all coming up in the next year, I did mention it's recommended that there's 3 potential areas be prioritized. We've committed 600 grand to match for those
Yes.
grants that were submitted. There's going to be another round of broadband grants, if you recall, coming that they're probably going to want to match to. So let's just plan on having that conversation when it happens. Remember, we'd mentioned that human services nonprofit partnerships, that can still be on the table about a nonprofit grant application process. And then I just mentioned that capital improvement plan, depending on how everything plays out, we got a couple parks that we're trying to build.
Yes.
And hopefully we can fund it out of our normal process, but if something happens, then we can still consider these funds. Okay?
Great,
And
thank
it-
you.
And it's all tracked with that fund
That's
right
the
there.
only other question.
The monies that we set aside for that, the $450 million grant from the state that we didn't get any part of. We had that 5% match of $1.5 million toward those three major projects. Did that come out of ARPA money?
Comes out of 40 and 42.
Okay, sorry.
Articles 40 and 42. So that money's still there. It's still ready to be. So going back to the schools about, if you go back and look at what I'm mentioning as far as capital, let me just bear with me 1 second. If you go and look, it's recommended that we budget that money's right there out of 40 and 42 to go into the cap reserve, and then these sales tax funds, future grants, and available lottery proceeds will dictate the outcome of the public schools. So that's where hopefully they'll go through another round of grants. We need to make sure we play that out as much as we can. And then if we get any of those grants, we take those grants, the lottery proceeds, 40 and 42 and 46, and that's how we develop our 5-year plan for the schools.
That's great.
If we're not successful in those future potential grants, then that 1.495 would go to just back into the 40 and 42 fund for future projects.
So what happens is we still do a 5-year plan, except now we don't have grants involved, and we use the 40 and 42 proceeds, the lottery proceeds, and Article 46 proceeds to do the 5-year plan.
And if the June 2nd bids for the pool, the current tax rates we're looking for next year's budget is 38 cents. And if we make a decision on June 3rd, once we know about the bids,
6th, be June 6th.
or June 6th, thank you, then potentially we'd go back to 36. Is that our plan?
Talk about it
Oh, okay,
on the 6th.
okay, all right.
I think it's premature to talk about what we're going to be able to do until we
See the money, see the
see the
contract.
numbers.
I'll have all the options available for you June 6th.
Oh, dear.
There will be one change on that capital outlay for the
Yes.
school. We're adding 100,000 for architect fees.
Correct.
Oh, that's right.
And that was mentioned
It was,
yesterday,
yes.
boys. On the capital outlay, 235. We're going to add 100,000. They're doing a RFP for a architect for those projects to get.
Yeah, right now, all the numbers that get presented to you boys are based upon just educated guesses from square footage. The schools are wanting to try to get a relationship with architects so they can get some real numbers and things together when they're trying to present, when we're trying to do this 5-year capital plan. So I'm recommending we put some money in there so that they can get some professional services to help them in these conversations.
The other big topics, is there anything else? I think I'm going to hit these last three big topics that I remember, and then if there's anything else that you can think of that we need to talk about, please let me know. The rescue squad building payment, that's been included in the budget. Any objections to that? Or the cashiers, Glenville cashiers, I should say.
No.
So I do want to mention one thing. They are saying now it's projected to be potentially up to 4.6, but the interest rates are lower. So the money's moving back lower than what we have budgeted. We have, I think it's 4.5%. Is that what it is? 4.5% for $4.5 million budgeted. So we can't keep moving the numbers around. So just so you know, if it comes in at 4.6 and they get an interest rate of 4%, then we may be coming back to you at a $4.6 million project, but the debt service payment doesn't change.
Correct.
Or we may not have to add more because of how the numbers work out. I'm sorry, I just want to let you know.
Absolutely.
That's going to be finalized.
Yeah, I knew
once
they
we
were
know
still
what the
working
numbers
on trying to get those numbers finalized. EMS salaries, this would be both for the Glenville cashiers, EMS employees, as well as the Harris Hospital paramedic program. We've in the budget, it's projected that we fund those increases to bring those salaries up to a higher amount to meet the market need in this area. Anybody object to that? It's been included. Any concerns? Okay. All right, the last really big ticket, unless somebody else has got something else that I'm forgot about, is the Silva Fire Department. Our manager has recommended that we fund 8 full-time positions with the Silva Fire Department. I had a conversation, I guess most of you probably have seen the article that was in the Silva Herald. And there was quite a bit of debate that took place at the Town of Silva board meeting as to whether or not the Town of Silva was totally in favor of the funding for a full-time department at 8. I spoke with the mayor of Silva last night, and I told her that today we would be taking up this item to get a consensus from the board whether to keep it in the budget or not. And if it stayed in the budget, then we needed from the Town of Silva some kind of official statement to say that they would accept it and are willing to accept it and want to move forward with this funding option. They're going to have a town board meeting on Thursday, and I think they're going to adopt their budget. If I remember what she said, they may be looking to adopt their budget. So we need to hear from Silva. I think whatever we decide today is we just sort of poll the board here to see whether to keep it in or take it out. It's going to be contingent upon what Silva wants. This is a town. These are going to be town employees. This is going to be a Silva Fire Department. It's a town municipal department. And if all of a sudden on Thursday the Town of Silva says, we would rather wait and have this conversation next year, or we're not interested, or we want 11, then, but we won't accept anything less than 11, then whatever that outcome is will have a huge bearing on what we do. So I think we need to decide, do we want to keep it in, and at what level, and it be contingent upon what Silva says on Thursday. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, sir. And I just want to clarify and just reiterate what my recommendation is. All right. Because it really plays into if the Town of Silva really truly believes they need 11 people or not. If you look, it's recommended that they be funded at $1,074,290. This will enable them to have full-time personnel. It'll enable them to, this amount provides enough funding to pay the debt, to pay multiple other things we were already paying, but then it also enough funding for 8 full-time personnel. But I do state, since this is a town department, the Town of Silva can choose to add additional personnel by adding town funds. I just want to clarify, I'm recommending this amount of money based upon the budget that was presented to the board that would fund up to 8 personnel. I'm not recommending that they limit themselves to 8 people. I'm recommending we fund up to 8 personnel, and they as a town, if they truly believe that they need 11, then they have the ability to fund 11. And that really is the point of my little sentence, my last sentence there. And I just wanted to clarify that as my recommendation, because I don't want it to sound as if though me as a manager is dictating that they can only have 8 people.
Correct.
I'm saying, from the county's perspective, I'm recommending we fund up to 8.
And I think it's also important, and I made the point to share this with the mayor last night. Cashiers Fire Department, the initial request from Cashiers Fire Department to go to a full-time paid department, 8 employees. And that's what we funded, 8 employees. Cullowhee Fire Department made the request to go to a full-time paid department. The request was for 8 employees. So this would be no different. It would fall in line with the other 2 that we have supported, in recent years, and it keeps it the same. And I think it's pretty remarkable when you look at the numbers. Cullowhee Fire Department's budget and the number of employees, 8. And then you look at the proposed funding for Silva and 8 employees, it's almost identical. There's very little difference. There's a slight difference in call volume, but it's pretty close, the amount of calls that Silva runs versus what Cullowhee runs. So I'm comfortable with what's been included in the budget as the manager has presented. I would be comfortable supporting those 8 employees if the town of Silva's willing to accept it. But if the town of Silva is not willing to accept it, then we would have to remove it. But I'm personally comfortable with leaving it in the proposed budget.
I agree with you.
Okay, so Mr. Woody, you want to go next?
No, I agree with that, and I think that one of our concerns was that we had expressed how they would go about hiring, and their town manager assured us that they have standards that they go by, and so I feel really good about that, and I think 8 is good.
Well, and the mayor mentioned to me that same question last night about the standards, and
Yes.
I told her that I know there are departments, for example, Asheville Fire Department, Skyland Fire Department, there's several within our region that are full-time, that have academies, and that they have standards, just like basic law enforcement training. You've got
Yes.
to meet a certain physical fitness test. There's a whole bunch of things you've got to be able to perform, tasks, to prove that you can perform the job. And that would be highly recommended that they follow with those kind of guidelines when they go do their hiring.
Seems like I asked Ms. Dowling for some of those standards. Did you ever receive anything on the standards for the firefighters, or? Seemed like I asked that question.
They constantly go through physical training and all kinds of training, just constantly.
Do what? No.
Go through constant training, physical training, and just, going into burning houses. I mean,
Well, you do have training, but there's not a standard. That's a little bit different when you look at a volunteer agency
compared
compared to a
Paid full-time.
paid
Right.
full-time.
Right,
That's our,
right.
Yeah, this is going to be a big difference.
Right.
Wait a minute now, Brian. This is a volunteer fire department.
Correct.
But no, those 8 people they hire they won't be brought to the same standard as those other 20, will they? I mean, they're not gonna be trained as they're trained, are they? Is that what you're saying?
Should be more qualified.
Say this again.
But those 8 firemen that we're gonna hire,
They're going to hire.
they are gonna hire. The standard
For them would be
that
different.
should be expected of them would be the same as if it's at the Asheville Fire Department.
Correct.
Now, the volunteers who are still there at a whole different thing.
Correct.
We all understand that.
Correct. Yeah, volunteers are not.
Like, Brian, he may have shared, or maybe didn't share, or maybe didn't want to share. I don't know. He shared with me some training of some firemen in it may have been New York.
Yeah, it was a New York
Did
Academy.
y'all see that?
Mm-mm.
I can share that with you.
And it'd be great for him to share that with y'all because, whew, it's like 2-a-day football practice. I thought it is.
Yeah. When I see they go to big cities like that, they do totally different training. I mean, you take one of our guys from here and throw him in New York City, he'd be lost. Get one of the New York City guys fighting a fire up in our mountains, he'd be lost. There's just different
It's
trainings
different.
for different regions.
There are standards the state has for fire departments. And those same standards apply to every fire department, whether it be a volunteer department or whether it be a full-time paid department.
okay.
All departments have to meet the same standards. I think the difference here is employees. When you're talking about a full-time employee and that is their full-time job, you're hiring someone based on qualifications. You're hiring someone to be able to do all of these tasks. And so your initial job application, the job description might say, we want someone who can meet this standard from a physical fitness standard, that they have to be able to achieve, at least either have or be able to achieve within a certain amount of time, this level of certification. So that these people are the professionals. They're not volunteers. You know, sometimes as volunteers, you may or may not ever be able to achieve all the standards. And I know especially right now in North Carolina, the fire department, the standards for fire training are so complex. You pretty much have to devote a significant amount of your time to go to these weekend schools or go to academies or to be able to get to the point where you can achieve the certifications. It's got harder and harder and harder and harder over the years to be able to ultimately achieve those certifications. So that's where volunteers can still protect their community. They can still do all the great work that our volunteers do in our county, and the volunteers at Silva Fire Department will continue to assist and work right beside the paid professionals. But we can hold paid professionals to a higher standard than we can
That's all-
volunteers.
That's all those paid,
Correct.
all they do. There's not one of them gonna be something else, they can just be slack. are they?
Well, I wouldn't think so. I would think that they would all be equal.
I may have said too much about all this fire department stuff, but when you read, Tom,
Yes, sir.
Silver Herald, and I wasn't at their meeting, when you read that from last week, it was quite obvious they didn't know themselves exactly what they wanted. And, they even changed their mind during the middle of the string. I think the chief must have been somewhere and decided he's gonna come down there and straighten them out, so he did. And, maybe I wasn't aware of it. He come down and gives me input on what way he felt about it. There's some of them wanted to postpone this for a year, was it not?
That's right.
So there's all different things there. And then there's some of them felt like that we were taken away from them. Did I read that incorrect?
Well, I don't know. I'm not going to interpret because a lot of times things get lost in translation, even with someone writing it.
So I interpreted that some of them, my interpretation of what was said in the paper was that some of them felt like maybe we were stepping somewhere we shouldn't step. Hell, we've been asked to do this. We've not
Correct.
pushed into it.
Well, this was a request that came to us from Silva. From the town manager came, the mayor was at the first meeting, the fire chief from Silva Fire Department. And I think it's also important to note that Silva Fire Department, while it's a municipal department and it's located within, their main station is located within the municipal area, they serve an area outside the municipality.
Yes.
In fact, 60% of their
Yes.
calls, more of their calls take place outside the municipal limits than what happens inside the municipal limits. And I know yesterday the mayor had even mentioned to me that all the way down to Dix Creek, which is way outside of Silva limits, their Silva Fire Department was out on the side of the 4-lane working an accident. So Silva Fire Department's boundary, their service district is a large area, and they serve a lot of county residents.
Yes.
And so we are trying to do something that we feel as a board will not only help Silva town, but it helps Silva rural, Silva County residents. Dillsboro, Webster, all the municipalities in that area that serviced by that fire department. Buffalo, wherever.
Yeah.
Because, we feel like this is a good thing for our county.
Yes.
And it's a good thing for our community. And if anything, we're trying to do a good thing. And so we want to do it in a good way. But at the same time, Silva needs to accept. If they don't want to do this, then they need to tell us on Thursday.
I did have one person from another fire department contact me and said he doesn't think it's a good idea that they get these people because a lot of times you go by a wreck and there'll be 4 people standing around. And he totally disagreed with the funding, but I mean, all calls are different. I mean,
Exactly.
you might get where you're gonna be standing around.
I promise you, you come to a wreck that I'm on, you're probably gonna see me standing there a lot of times, because there's a lot of downtime where you're waiting on a wrecker.
Right.
Where
Or
you're just-
ambulance or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Boys, how do you feel about keeping it in the budget?
I feel just like I felt, maybe I've changed my mind, I guess I have some. I feel like the 8 persons is adequate. 10 would be better, 11 would be better, it'd be better if it's 14 full-time firemen, I mean, we all know that, but we gonna do what we can do. Now, I agree with our manager that, they want to add 2 or 3 or 11 or how many more, there it is.
But this is a good start.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah,
good
Yeah, it's a
start.
good start.
I don't want to, I kinda also read into that is, well, we'll get this 8 and we'll just keep working on 11. Well, I can understand that, but it's like, we'll get this 8 in the county and then they'll give us 11, 3 more in just another year or 2 and whatever. Well, I think we kinda need to hold it. If they want to add more, let them add more. And if they want to add 2 more, then us to add 2 with them or something of that nature. We can't keep just carrying the water for them.
With
I'm for it.
the way the manager, Mr. Manager left it though, it said the town of Silva can choose to add additional personnel by adding town funds to the operations. So it throws it in their court. We're giving you 8. If you want more, it's up to you.
Mr.
The whole
Jones?
thing has been about the training and who those 8 people are, and are they someone that when that call comes out, that they can go and they're fit to do the job. And some of those jobs, like Brian says, you go in a car's running into the rear end of another one, there's not a whole lot to do sometimes with direct traffic and until we can get people there. But every once in a while, you get in a situation where it takes everything in your being to do something. And there's sometimes you get there, they're the first one there, aren't you, Brian?
Yeah.
And there's stuff to do that you wished you had help, but you just got to do the best you can. And some of it's everything from CPR on up. So you got to have people that's competent.
It's a tough, tough job, and my hat goes off to all those that do it on a full-time basis and do what they do.
I couldn't do it.
Yes.
But Commissioner Jones, how do you feel about keeping it in the budget?
Yes, keep it in the budget. I still would like to see, going with some comments that Commissioner Dietz made, standards that the town of Silva is looking to hire the 8 full-time. I still would like to see that. If anything, out of curiosity, won't change my mind any, but it's more curious. And I think this board has shown its commitment to safety throughout Jackson County with the additional firemen that we put in all 7 districts. Or maybe not Cashers, but the other districts. So we upped it from 1 to 2 paid firemen, so that we've already set that important fact, as well as adding 8, offering 8 to the town of Silva, enhances that and enhances, as Commissioner McMahon, or Chairman McMahon mentioned, the rural fire district outside the municipality.
Another thing I think is important to note is, and I say this because I believe this board, not only all 5 of us have sat here for multiple meetings and evaluated these requests to try to find a way to provide the best emergency service protection for our community.
Absolutely.
But we've also done this to try to fund it in a way that has the least burden on the taxpayers.
That's right.
And if we went with a traditional fire tax district in the town of Silva, this would be a tremendous burden on the residents of Silva. But we've chosen to approach this in a manner that lessens the impact and that we can make this affordable. And we're the only organization that can do that.
Well, there you go.
Well said.
Yep.
Very good.
Any other comments or questions about the Silva? If you'll please convey, Mr. Adams, to the town manager that this board has chose to leave the funding in the budget. But we are awaiting an answer from the town of Silva from Thursday. That we need some kind of confirmation if they're willing to accept this or not.
Okay.
And then when we meet again on June 6th to review the numbers for the pool bids, if the town of Silva rejects the 8 employees and they would rather wait to another budget cycle, then we'll put this from the budget at that point.
Very good. I'll do that. One other point I just wanted to remind everybody and to just follow through. That proposed budget is 1,321,000. The 1,074,290 that's in the proposed budget is 81% of the total cost. We keep saying 8 people. We're paying more than just 8 people. We're
Correct.
paying, we're contributing to help pay for up to 8 people, but we're also making a debt service payment. We're continuing on with what was our annual contribution to operations. And so we're funding operations up to an 8-person operation, which includes those 8 people and other operations. And that's 81% of the total budget.
Correct. And it's a big percentage. Any other budget items? Can anybody think of anything in the budget that we need to revisit, to look at?
In the recreation part, this is not so much, it's just a note. I noticed that we have a fee for trainers for if you need to go and have a workout. That's how I perceived it. I saw a fee for a trainer. Do we have trainer? Who would be that trainer?
We contract people to come in and do that.
Okay, okay. All right.
There again, you want a professional to do that too.
Yeah, I know some of the people that they're personal trainers at.
I guess you use more often than you might think.
I'm trying to go to sleep.
Anybody else got anything?
I just appreciate all the hard work that Mr. Adams has done and Ms. Fox. It's a wonderful effort on their part, and I do believe, as our chairman said, it really does reflect our desire to meet the needs of our community.
Correct. All right, well, I believe that's it, unless y'all have any other questions you need us to answer, direction.
Yes, sir.
The big one's gonna come June 2nd,
2 p.m.
and we'll meet at that special call meeting on Monday, the 6th, for Dawn to officially review with each one of us as a board how the numbers came in on the bids and what that impact to our budget will be, and what our options are.
Yes, sir.
We're hoping for good news, so keep your fingers crossed. We'll make that decision on the 6th.
Yes, sir.
Okay, with that being said and no other items, then do I have a motion to adjourn the work session?
So move.
Your second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.